Imagine waking up to the news that the United States government has shut down. What does that even mean?
Right.
Are federal buildings closing their doors? Do employees lose their paychecks? And, I mean, if the most powerful country in the world can't keep its government running, is it still dependable on the global stage?
It's a huge question. It touches on, well, both the practical stuff, the operational mechanics, and also that bigger picture, geopolitical credibility.
Yeah.
We are looking at more than just a political squabble here. It's an operational crisis.
Yeah.
It has immediate, measurable human costs. And then there's this deeper sort of long-term economic and diplomatic damage.
Absolutely. So our mission today is really to move past the pretty toxic political rhetoric. And trust us, the rhetoric is vicious right now.
Oh, definitely.
And conduct a comprehensive deep dive into this 2025 federal government shutdown. We're going straight to the sources. We really need to focus on the mechanics of how this happened, the devastating domestic impact on critical services and, millions of federal employees, and then those inevitable international implications for U.S. global dependability.
Okay, so let's just establish the facts right off the bat. This funding lapse, it began precisely at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on October 1st, 2025.
October 1st. Right on schedule, in a way.
Exactly. It's the direct result of Congress not acting on the appropriations needed for the new 2026 fiscal year. This event, it's now the 11th shutdown in U.S. history that resulted in a major curtailment of services.
The 11th, wow.
And notably, it's the third such instance under President Trump.
Right, and the immediate scale of the disruption is just staggering. I mean, it's unforgiving. We are talking about roughly 900,000 federal employees immediately furloughed, sent home without pay, prohibited from doing their jobs. And then, meanwhile, another 700,000 workers, these are the essential personnel, right? Law enforcement, military.
The accepted employees, yeah.
They're legally obligated to keep showing up to work, performing critical duties, but without receiving their scheduled paychecks. That's 1.6 million people whose financial lives were just thrown into deep uncertainty overnight, all because of legislative gridlock.
It's a massive number.
Mm-hmm.
And to really grasp the gravity of this, we kind of have to start at the foundational law.
Okay.
The U.S. Congress, it holds the sole authority to appropriate funds drawn from the Treasury. That's right there in Article 1 of the Constitution.
Our power of the purse.
Exactly. The federal government operates on a fiscal year that starts October 1st. So it requires the passage of 12 individual spending bills, or, at minimum, a single temporary measure called a continuing resolution, a CR, by that deadline.
So when the deadline passes, October 1st hits, and Congress hasn't acted, the money just runs out. But why can't the government just, keep going for a few days while they argue? Why this immediate mandatory closure? Why stop non-essential work?
Yeah, that's the key structural point, isn't it? And it really drives this dysfunction. The requirement to physically shut down, to suspend non-essential operations, it doesn't actually come directly from the Constitution itself.
Oh, okay.
It comes from a strict interpretation of a law from way back, the 1884 Anti-Deficiency Act.
1884?
Yeah. This act basically makes it illegal for government agencies to spend money or even accept voluntary services unless there's an appropriation or some other specific legal authority already in place.
I seem to recall, though, that the original act wasn't always interpreted to force a shutdown every single time there was a funding gap. What changed?
That's a really crucial historical point. You're right. For decades, funding lapses were, pretty common, actually.
Wow.
But they were often solved quietly, behind the scenes, with minimal disruption.
Right.
But that changed dramatically. It was following these legal opinions issued by Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti back in 1980 and 1981.
Civiletti.
Yeah. These opinions, they dramatically tightened the definition of the Anti-Deficiency Act. They basically said that agencies must immediately suspend all operations except those strictly necessary for the, quote, safety of human life or the protection of property.
So that's where the essential versus non-essential distinction comes from.
Precisely. That legal interpretation is what created this whole concept of furloughed versus accepted workers. And it turned what used to be temporary funding delays into these mandatory, full-scale operational crises we see now.
Okay, so let's unpack the immediate cause of this event, the 2025 shutdown. It wasn't just a failure to agree on the total budget number, was it?
No, not at all.
Our sources are highlighting this intense partisan deadlock. It seems centered around really core ideological issues, spending levels, these major foreign aid rescissions, and pretty contentious domestic policy fights, especially over health insurance subsidies.
Yeah, the core conflict here is fascinating. You had Republicans, strongly backed by the administration, advocating for what they called a clean continuing resolution. Meaning just a short-term extension that basically maintains the status quo funding levels. Just keep things running as they are to give them more time to negotiate.
Yeah.
One version they proposed would fund the government until, I think it was November 21st. Their main demand was fiscal restraint and some policy reforms.
But Democrats saw that differently. They saw it as legislative surrender, basically. They demanded that any funding deal had to include policy extensions.
Right.
They fought specifically for extensions for the Affordable Care Act, the ACA insurance subsidies, which are set to expire soon, and they vigorously opposed any policy reversals on Medicaid eligibility.
And Republicans, in turn, framed those Democratic demands as insisting on taxpayer-funded health care for work-ready adults and illegal immigrants.
Right.
Just harden the partisan lines even further. And then complicating negotiations, like exponentially, was the revival and really aggressive use of presidential rescission power.
Rescission power. Explain that a bit.
It's a power for the president to unilaterally cancel funds that Congress has already approved. It's a practice that was substantially curtailed, actually, by the 1974 Impoundment Control Act, specifically after disputes with President Nixon over holding back funds.
So wait, the 1974 Act was designed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral cancellation. How did the administration manage to revive it?
Well, they operated within, let's say, technical loopholes and really pushed the constitutional boundaries of executive power. For instance, the Trump administration used this power quite dramatically back in July 2025. They rescinded $9 billion that had been allocated for foreign aid and public broadcasting.
$9 billion. Just
like that. And Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he explicitly articulated the resulting crisis of trust. He said, basically, any funding amendment the Democrats negotiated would, in their view, be instantly undone by the president just using this rescission power unilaterally.
So why even bother negotiating?
Exactly. This inherent distrust just poisoned the well. It made any kind of good faith legislative compromise virtually impossible.
So despite having both a Democratic plan on the table funding until October 31st with the healthcare extensions and a Republican plan funding until November 21st, status quo both failed to get the required 60 votes in the Senate.
Correct, gridlock.
Which forced the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to initiate the shutdown procedure. Okay, now let's detail for the listener what exactly stops working. Because it's not everything, but it's a lot.
Right. The curtailment of these non-essential services hits immediately, and it often creates crises for people who are most reliant on federal aid. Take health and food services, for example. The WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children, provides crucial food assistance.
Very important program.
Hugely important. It's expected to pause operations and pretty rapidly exhaust any contingency funding it might hold.
Okay, wait a minute. If SNAP benefits, food stamps, were secured a month in advance, why wasn't WIC secured too? Is there some fundamental difference in how those two programs are funded that makes one so much more vulnerable?
That's a really key distinction, actually. SNAP is what's called an entitlement program. That means it has mandatory funding streams that are often routed a month or so in advance, which is why October's payments were secure.
Okay.
WIC, however, is a discretionary grant program. It's subject to annual appropriations by Congress. So if Congress doesn't pass a specific bill for WIC, the money just runs out immediately. So while SNAP benefits for October were secured, if this shutdown drags on, those contingency funds will deplete, delaying future payments and really exacerbating food insecurity for millions, including, it's worth noting, a significant number of vulnerable adults over 50 who rely on SNAP.
Gosh, okay. And what about the impact on, say, cutting-edge research? Public health safety.
Yeah, scientific and research work suffers drastically. The National Institutes of Health, the NIH, the nation's leading medical research body, they retained only about 25% of their staff.
Only a quarter.
Only a quarter. This means grant peer reviews, which are essential for allocating billions in future research dollars, they just stop entirely. New clinical trials can't start. And critically, new patients who are seeking potentially life-saving treatment through existing clinical trials, they get turned away at the door.
Turned away.
Furthermore, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they're forced to delay routine inspections.
Right.
The ones necessary to ensure the safety of our food supply, drugs, medical devices.
Right.
And we know from past shutdowns, like the one in 2018-2019, that this lag increases public health risks across the board. It's not theoretical.
And these effects, they just grind everyday economic activity to a halt too, right?
Exactly. I mean, if you're trying to start or grow a business, this is potentially devastating. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, immediately stops processing new business loans, specifically the popular 7A and 504 programs.
So just freezes capital.
It freezes capital for thousands of small enterprises. And then in the legal sector, the backlog is catastrophic. In one prior shutdown, over 86,000 immigration court hearings were canceled. 86,000.
Just adding to the backlog.
Massively. And in this 2025 event, Justice Department lawyers immediately requested halts to deadlines in civil proceedings involving the U.S. government. So legal movement just grinds to a stop.
Okay. Now let's maybe reassure listeners a bit about what continues the accepted and truly essential services.
Right, because a lot of vital functions do persist, largely because they involve protecting life and property, or they're funded outside the annual appropriations cycle. Things like entitlements, Social Security, SSI checks, existing Medicare and Medicaid benefits, they continue. Provided, and this is an important caveat, the lapse doesn't stretch beyond, say, a couple of months.
Okay, but even then, it's not smooth sailing, is it?
No, definitely not. Administrative services from the Social Security Administration, for example, are severely reduced. That means customer service wait times for things like new enrollments, corrections, or just general inquiries, they become massive, huge delays.
And public safety remains operational, but the people providing it are doing so without pay. That's the critical point.
Correct. Essential services related to national security, law enforcement, FBI, Marshals Service, border security with CBP, air traffic control under the FAA, and the TSA folks at the airport, they'll continue. Active duty military personnel are required to work.
And veterans.
VA medical facilities and core benefits continue, thankfully. But other support services, things like education benefits, job training assistance, aid for homeless veterans, those are frequently curtailed because they rely on administrative staff who are furloughed.
Right. It's a logistical bright spot, I guess, that services like the U.S. Postal Service are entirely unaffected because they're self-funded.
That's right.
Similarly, Amtrak and core air travel operations continue. However, the industry is already warning, aren't they, about potential delays and safety issues looming because of the massive strain and, frankly, low morale on those unpaid FAA and TSA workers.
Absolutely. You can only ask people to work for free under stressful conditions for so long before things start to fray.
Okay, let's shift from which services stop to the people themselves, the ones forced to stop working or forced to work for free. You mentioned this distinction, furloughed versus accepted.
Yes, and understanding the difference is really crucial to understanding the human toll. You've got the 900,000 furloughed workers prohibited from working, unpaid, and then the 700,000 accepted workers, including law enforcement, military, who are legally obligated to show up and work, but without getting their scheduled pay.
They're essentially forced volunteers, aren't they? In the middle of all this political theater, they're showing up every day doing jobs critical to national safety while watching their bank accounts just shrink.
It's incredibly difficult.
And while the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019 does guarantee back pay once the government reopens, that promise is, well, it's worthless for paying the rent now or buying groceries now.
Exactly. The financial strain is acute, it's immediate. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, FLEOA, they immediately detailed the severe crisis. They said missed paychecks still mean, and I'm quoting here, missed mortgage payments, empty refrigerators, and mounting stress for families who depend on that income, but paycheck to paycheck.
Which is most families.
And for law enforcement specifically, they're being asked to pull away from critical investigations sometimes to take on extra administrative duties left by the furloughed staff.
Right.
So it creates burnout while they're also worrying about feeding their families. It's a terrible combination.
And compounding this already brutal situation is something pretty unprecedented this time around, the threat that these furloughs might not actually be temporary.
Right.
Our sources reveal that the Trump administration explicitly instructed agencies to prepare reduction in force plans, RIF plans.
RIF.
This means mass, permanent layoffs, doesn't it? Instead of just the traditional reliance solely on temporary furloughs.
It is a radical departure from established bureaucratic norms for handling these funding lapses. RIFs are typically complex, slow processes. They're usually used for long-term downsizing or restructuring, not as an immediate response to a temporary funding gap.
So why now?
Well, OMB Director Russell Vought confirmed that these layoffs would begin within just a couple of days of the shutdown starting. And he specifically noted that RIFs were designed to clear out, quote, deadwood, waste, and fraud. And they were framed politically as primarily affecting employees who would likely vote against the administration.
Wow. So that moves the shutdown from being, a temporary financial inconvenience for the employee, however painful, to an existential threat, not just to their job, but potentially to the whole federal civil service structure itself.
Absolutely.
Minority leaders immediately characterized this plan as outright intimidation. I can see why.
And the labor unions immediately questioned the legality of it. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, they argued that carrying out permanent RIFs during a funding lapse actually poses a legal paradox.
Oh, so?
Because the very staff required to process and execute these complex firing plans would technically be prohibited from working by the Anti-Deficiency Act.
Ah, the catch-22.
Exactly. So this maneuver effectively used the threat of permanent job loss as a political weapon, directly targeting the nonpartisan nature of the federal workforce.
And we also have to look at the severe impact on staff who literally cannot walk away. The Council of Local Prisons, representing the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the BOP staff, they painted a really grim picture.
Yeah, BOP facilities have to remain fully operational 24/7. Prison officers who are already grappling with dangerously low staffing levels and mandatory overtime on a regular basis.
A known crisis even before the shutdown.
A known ongoing crisis. They are now forced to continue this incredibly high-stress work without pay. This dramatically amplifies fatigue, it accelerates burnout, and critically, it escalates safety risks in these highly volatile, understaffed prisons, where every single shift is a potential security risk.
It sounds like a vicious and self-perpetuating cycle. The shutdown forces staff to work for free under dangerous conditions,
Right.
which signals immense instability to anyone thinking about applying for these jobs, making it nearly impossible to recruit new officers. And then experienced officers leave for more stable state or local law enforcement positions.
That's exactly the dynamic. It just hollows out the workforce.
And this instability, it's set against the backdrop of an already depleted workforce, isn't it? There was something else happening right as the shutdown began.
Yes, that's right. Just as the shutdown began, roughly 100,000 federal workers who had accepted the Trump administration's Fork in the Road Initiative buyout offer officially left their positions.
The Fork in the Road Initiative.
Yeah, it was a targeted initiative that offered certain employees the chance to resign while keeping their full pay and benefits until the end of September, right before the fiscal year ended.
So let me get this straight. We entered the shutdown already missing 100,000 experienced workers who took a voluntary exit package, only to immediately face the threat of forcing another nearly 1 million people out permanently via these RAFs.
That is precisely the context. The federal government started this shutdown already severely short-staffed due to these voluntary departures, and then immediately followed up with threats of forced permanent layoffs. This creates a severe brain drain, especially in specialized and technical fields, undermining capacity long before the current budget dispute is even resolved.
Okay, moving beyond the domestic hardship, which is clearly immense, a U.S. government shutdown always sends these powerful, unsettling ripples across the globe, doesn't it? What happens when the world's largest economy and, dominant military power voluntarily hits the pause button?
Well, the first tangible hit is usually a slowdown in critical international processes. The State Department, for instance, planned to furlough 62% of its staff.
62%.
Yeah. Now, while consular services, passports, visa issuance, they're prioritized under that life and property exemption we talked about.
Right.
A 62% cut means that routine processing inevitably backs up. Big time.
And this isn't just about delaying tourist visas, is it? This affects student visas, skilled worker visas, the ability of American businesses to staff their international projects.
Precisely. A prolonged shutdown will significantly slow down the ability of people to travel and engage in commerce with the U.S. It directly affects international travelers, global commerce, and even American citizens trying to seek assistance overseas. This operational slowdown immediately translates into a perception of, unreliability.
And that perception translates into concrete market reactions, I imagine. The U.S. economy, and crucially, things like the aviation industry you mentioned, it contributes $1.37 trillion in GDP. They operate on the assumption of government stability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the global reaction was immediate. Even ahead of the shutdown, the U.S. dollar and U.S. Treasury securities, the assets the world relies on as the ultimate safe haven, they fell.
They dropped.
This decline reflects immediate economic uncertainty. Global investors, foreign governments, they watch this stuff closely because U.S. government dysfunction undermines its role as the stable anchor of the global financial system. We saw state financial officers, foundations, local chambers of commerce, places like Arizona and Georgia issuing warnings, stressing that stability is absolutely paramount for attracting investors and maintaining U.S. global competitiveness.
And for our closest trade partners like Canada and Mexico, the disruption isn't just financial, it's a physical choke on commerce, right?
Yeah.
At the border.
It is. The Border Trade Alliance warned explicitly that furloughs and service interruptions would create costly delays and jeopardize economic stability on both sides of the border. Customs and Border Protection, CDP personnel, they're already stretched thin. Now they have to continue working without pay to process massive volumes of trade. This strain jeopardizes the economic flow and, frankly, makes the U.S. look unreliable and internally chaotic as a trade partner.
Okay, and here is where the political manipulation seems to reach a new level. The administration apparently used the shutdown not just as a consequence of failing to fund, but as a calculated opportunity to freeze specific infrastructure projects in states controlled by the opposition party.
This is a profound move, really, turning bureaucratic delay into what looks like punitive action. The White House Office of Management and Budget, OMB, immediately froze approximately $18 billion in New York City infrastructure projects.
$18 billion. Which projects?
Specifically, the massive Hudson Tunnel project and the Second Avenue subway expansion. And the target was pretty undeniable. Yeah. This is the home state of Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries.
And the rationale given for the freeze, was it explicitly political?
Well, the OMB stated the funds were put, quote, on hold to ensure funding is not flowing based on unconstitutional DEI principles. They cited a review process that would conveniently be delayed indefinitely by the furloughs.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, so they tied it to that.
Yes. It effectively weaponizes the shutdown, using the funding lapse as a lever of political pressure to stop major infrastructure projects that benefit the constituents of opposition leaders.
And furthermore, our sources indicated the administration also canceled $8 billion in climate-related spending across 16 states that voted for the opposition party in 2024.
That's right.
The message sent internationally must be pretty stark then. U.S. investment isn't guaranteed even by congressional approval. It can be undone and politically targeted via executive action during one of these manufactured funding crises.
It certainly signals a level of unpredictability and politicization that worries global partners.
Okay, let's pull back to the bigger picture. Erosion of trust, dysfunction. You mentioned shutdowns are typically temporary. The government does reopen eventually. But the accumulated cost is permanent, isn't it? It represents a profound waste of taxpayer money and economic capacity.
Absolutely. We really need to confront the reality that this kind of political brinkmanship is simply bad, costly business. The costs always seem to far outweigh any perceived savings or political gain achieved.
Can we quantify that? The permanent economic damage?
We can, actually.
Yeah.
Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they estimated that the 35-day shutdown back in 2018-2019 cost the U.S. economy $11 billion in total.
$11 billion.
$11 billion. And crucially, that included $3 billion in permanent lost gross domestic product, GDP that just vanished, never recovered.
$3 billion gone forever. And the 2013 shutdown.
The 2013 shutdown was estimated to have cost even more, around $24 billion. It slowed fourth quarter GDP growth that year by about 0.6%.
Where does that permanent loss actually come from? Why doesn't it just bounce back?
Well, it stems from several factors. First, you have canceled government contracts that are just never reissued. Businesses lose out. Second, there's irreversible damage, for example, to scientific data or clinical trials that simply cannot be restarted where they left off.
Right.
And third, there's a significant loss of institutional knowledge and just sheer productivity wasted during the days, sometimes weeks, required for agencies to play catch-up after reopening. It's taxpayer money being spent not on delivering services, but just on recovery and dealing with administrative backlog.
And this dysfunction, it creates these lasting problems that compromise future safety and growth, doesn't it? Especially in highly technical areas like aviation.
That's a massive vulnerability. This cycle of dysfunction forces the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, to immediately suspend controller hiring and training.
Right, when they need more controllers.
Exactly. The aviation community warned that even with the recent $12.5 billion investment in the air traffic control system, they still need another $19 billion from modernization initiatives like NextGen. Suspending hiring and training just makes the existing staffing shortage worse. It directly jeopardizes long-term aviation safety and efficiency, long after the funding is restored. These are highly specialized roles. They take years to master. Suspending the training pipeline creates a safety risk horizon years down the road.
And we also saw political brinkmanship around other critical safety nets right down to the wire, didn't we? Specifically with flood insurance.
That's right. The National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, its authorization, was also set to lapse right on the shutdown deadline. This political gridlock risked leaving millions of Americans in coastal and flood-prone areas without protection.
And that impacts property sales too, right?
Massively. It disrupts potentially up to 1,400 property sales per day because mortgages require this flood insurance. When coverage lapses like that, these areas are forced to rely solely on limited federal disaster aid, which FEMA staff can only respond to in emergencies anyway, and long-term recovery efforts get severely hampered by lack of funding in the disaster relief fund. It's just cascading failure.
Okay, let's pivot finally to the political toxicity surrounding this. The rhetoric was immediate and, frankly, vicious. How did the blame game play out this time?
Oh, it was instant finger-pointing. You had Republicans claiming Democrats were holding the economy hostage by demanding the inclusion of expensive healthcare subsidies. They framed their push for a clean CR as just common-sense fiscal management.
And the Democrats?
Democrats countered by stressing the urgency of those healthcare extensions. They highlighted the GOP's refusal to engage in what they saw as meaningful negotiation, positioning Republicans as the obstructors who were prioritizing ideological policy reversals over simply keeping the government open.
And the administration deployed some new, highly personalized tactics to express this toxicity, didn't they?
Indeed. Hours before the shutdown actually hit, President Trump posted this satirical AI-generated video directly targeting Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries.
An AI video.
An AI video. This move was significant not only for its vulgarity, but because it followed their first ever meeting together at the White House just hours before. It immediately set a tone of personal destruction rather than statesmanship.
Wow. And we also saw political messages being deployed by government agencies themselves, which raises major questions about the nonpartisan role of the civil service.
Yes, this raised serious ethical concerns and potential legal violations, too. Websites for federal agencies, including the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, they feature these prominent red banners or pop-up messages immediately blaming the radical left in Congress for the shutdown.
On official government websites?
On official government websites. This prompted complaints about potential violations of the Hatch Act, which is the law that limits political activity by federal employees. And here's the deep irony.
Go on.
The Office of Special Counsel, which is the very agency tasked with investigating Hatch Act violations, was itself closed during the shutdown.
You can't make this stuff up.
Exactly. It turned the political stunt into this weird commentary on the collapse of accountability norms.
So after all this toxicity, all this dysfunction, how did the American public react? What did the polls show?
Well, initial polls showed a really deep erosion of trust in the government's basic ability to function. While partisans, predictably, blamed the opposite side, the initial data indicated that independent voters were most likely to blame both parties.
Blame Congress as a whole.
Exactly. Illustrating that the public largely views this cycle as repeated, self-inflicted harm driven by political gain, not by genuine policy necessity. You know, when something like 45% of voters blame Republicans and 32% blame Democrats, the unified message is pretty clear. Congress failed the country. Again.
So let's try to wrap this up. We've covered the ground. The immediate, painful fragility of essential food and health services like WIC and NIH grants, the severe financial pain inflicted on those 1.6 million federal workers, whether they're working for free or stuck at home, the targeted nature of executive actions freezing infrastructure in specific opposition states, and the very real economic cost that permanently erodes our GDP and compromises future safety.
It seems pretty clear that the modern government shutdown has become this unique form of American political conflict, one that prioritizes scoring ideological points over fiscal stability and national credibility. You know, the U.S. government shutdown doesn't signal the collapse of the nation, not yet anyway, but it does starkly reveal the profound fragility of trust.
Trust between whom?
Trust between political leaders, certainly.
Oh.
Trust between the government and its own employees, and crucially, international trust in the U.S. as a dependable global anchor.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given the Trump administration's unprecedented threat of implementing mass, permanent layoffs, those reductions in force, the RIFs, and the concurrent immediate departure of thousands of experienced employees through that fork-in-the-road initiative buyout just before the shutdown, What long-term impact will this cycle of extreme political uncertainty and threats have on the ability of the federal government to actually recruit and retain the necessary nonpartisan, specialized expertise required to run a massive, complex government in the future?
It's a critical question. I mean, when the system repeatedly threatens to eliminate your job through permanent RAFs or forces you to work without pay for weeks on end, why would a highly skilled engineer or a cybersecurity expert or public health scientist choose public service over the stability and certainty of the private sector? The talent pipeline needs stability, and this cycle seems to be systematically destroying it.
Definitely food for thought long after the government reopens and the checks finally start flowing again. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.